Welcome back, everyone, to another edition of our Survivor videos. If you're like me and you picked the Packers in week 4, you barely survived an overtime thriller, but it's not about how much they win by. All that matters is that they win. And here we are in week 5 of the Survivor. As always, like the video if you're enjoying it, subscribe if you haven't, and you're using this content to help you go along your Survivor leagues. And also, comments and questions in the comment section below are encouraged. Love hearing you guys are picking. Love hearing you guys' questions. Keep it all coming along. This week, after a tough few weeks to survive the last couple of weeks, I think this one is one of the easier ones in memory. A lot of teams favored by closer touchdown, if not that touchdown and more. A lot of home teams, and even more importantly, a lot of home teams not playing their divisional rivals. So that's really good for a lot of cases here, especially if you haven't picked these teams yet. So here's the 7 teams we're looking at this week for potential picks. And then, as you always like to do, before you decide who you're picking, take a look at the schedule ahead. If you're thinking of playing a little bit of strategy game, see what teams are looking like in either in the immediate future or the long-term future, depending on how competitive your league is, and something that's very important if you want to win the league. So as we start most videos off, we're talking about the teams that you should be wary of picking. I don't like to tell you guys outright to avoid a team because it is your decision, but these are the teams I would think twice at least about picking. The first one being the Jacksonville Jaguars, who are now the favorite to win the AFC South, hosting the Texans at home. It's definitely a value play at the same time as a perceived caution play too, because this is a Jaguars team that's relatively unproven. They've looked good against subpar teams. They competed, for the first half with the Eagles, and, they shut out the Colts, but even when the Jaguars are bad, they shut out the Colts and, or shut down the Colts at the very least when they're at home. So hard to read in this team this season. Definitely a value pick, but just being a divisional opponent, albeit the Texans, who are one of the worst teams in football, it's still something to think about. It doesn't mean avoid the Jags here this week, but I think it's a little bit riskier play just because I don't think what I've seen warrants a 7.5-point spread at home against a divisional opponent for the Jaguars. That being said, I do think the Jaguars are pretty legitimate, especially on defense. I think that's enough to get the win versus the Texans. But you never know. And I like to, again, avoid divisional games when I can. And that's probably why I'll stay away from this one. This was later in the year, and the Jags, I had a little more film on them and can get a better read. It might not be perceived with caution, but just because they're relatively unproven this season, again, not reading too much into the Colts win, then I know I like to see a little bit more before I pick the Jags here. So a little hesitant on the Jags. Also a little hesitant on the Vikings too. Divisional game. I think the Bears were terrible, but the Vikings seem to play down to their competition. They barely squeaked out a win against the Lions, and the same thing with the Saints in the London game. That's telling me this Vikings team has so much talent, especially on offense, but you just never know what you're going to get out of them. It's very hard to rely on them. It's just a team that is so inconsistent. It's so hard to pick these guys in Survivor after what I've seen with them. And they definitely should have lost that game to the Lions. They got outplayed. They're just lucky the Lions defense is by far the worst in the league. They won't be so lucky against the Bears, who have, a little bit more solid defense, but their offensive passing attack is just horrendous. I would be surprised if, I guess, the Vikings lost, but at the same time, I'm really not surprised when the Vikings struggle, just because you never know when Kirk Cousins is going to lay an egg. It is inevitable sometimes. Could it be this game? Maybe, and you really don't want to take that chance in Survivor. I think it's best to stay away from the Vikings here. It's a divisional opponent. Coming back from London, that definitely will play a factor into their team. I don't think enough to make them lose, but definitely adds another reason why maybe stay away from them this week. And the last team to pursue caution with the Chiefs at home. This isn't as much as because I think the Raiders are good. I think the Raiders are a pretty bad team. I think the Chiefs are really great. I just really hate picking games in these AFC West matchups because somehow, some way, no matter the team, they will, no matter how bad they seem to step up in occasions where they shouldn't. I'd be very surprised if the Chiefs at home, the way they look this year, lose to the Raiders. But I think you're going to get a ton of more opportunities too. More importantly, with the Chiefs later in the year to pick them, and that's why that's a little bit more the reason why I'm saying don't pick the Chiefs here. There are going to be so many better opportunities later in the year to pick the Chiefs, especially at home against a non-divisional opponent. So I'd say wait off on that when you get so many other good games to pick. The best pick this week, again, if you watch these videos, you know it's almost always, especially if you haven't picked them, it's almost always going to be the team that's favored by the most points, especially when you're favored by 2 touchdowns at home with Josh Allen. Not much, really much to say about this one. Steelers are throwing out Kenny Pickett for his first career start against this Bills defense that is, even with some key injuries, is still incredible. Josh Allen, shows that he can come back from being down against a really good Ravens team there. Can't say the same thing about the Steelers, whose offense has been struggling, and their defense without TJ Watt is really struggling. And they got a couple key injuries. I'm not sure the status yet, but guys like Minkah Fitzpatrick and Cam Hayward, the other two best players in that defense that aren't named TJ Watt, are struggling with injuries too. Even if they both play, the Steelers defense is not the same without Watt. And if they don't play, they are no longer an above average defense without those guys. So look for the Bills and Josh Allen, the passing attack, just to torch the Steelers here at home. Kind of a proven win after they lost to the Dolphins and then struggled with the Ravens. I expect this to be a very big bounce back game for the Bills and a convincing win against the subpar Steelers team that really doesn't have business with Kenny Pickett playing against Josh Allen. And talking about the best value pick, before I go into this, I think there's some confusion with people that forget what I said in week one. This best value pick is not the second best pick in the board. It might not even be the third best pick in the board. In this case, this best value pick is probably the worst pick on the board, but this is for the people that are really trying to out-strategize their opponents. These are for people that are in very competitive, very heavy populated survivor leagues where picking the best pick each week is not going to win it for you. You really got to think outside the box. And this week, you look at the schedule. There's one team that noticeably does not have too many games in their schedule I'd pick, and that game is even in week 18, and that's the Saints. They don't have a lot of stuff in their schedule where I'm saying I feel comfortable picking them in this spot. Even the game that I'm picking in week 18 is a Panthers team that they just lost to. So I think at home they wouldn't lose to them. But I don't think you're really making the week 18 this year in Survivor League anyways, given how many people have been bounced. The value pick is the Saints this week. Again, don't go on and pick the Saints if you're risk averse and you're in a league where there's like 10 guys left. Then you should be picking the Bills. But if you're in a league with still 1,000 people left and you're trying to outmaneuver a lot of these people that you know are going to be picking the Bills or the Bucks this week, then you're really in a good spot to pick the Saints because you're not going to pick them many times, if ever again this season. And two, if you're somehow the Bills or Bucks and one of these other top teams go down, you kind of shield yourself there. Don't recommend the Saints pick this week because the Seahawks and Geno Smith look pretty solid, but this spread is -6 for a reason. That's because the Saints defense is really good, and I don't think Geno Smith and that offense are really going to be able to handle that Saints defense, especially with DK Metcalf's injury too. Not likely. So I think Saints are a good value pick here. But to go and review, I mean, do what I'm doing. Take the easy pick with the Bills. They will win this game without a doubt in my mind. I just cannot see the Steelers winning in a game where I think the Bills need to bounce back and prove to themselves that, the first 2 games might have been really easy, but that's not how the NFL works. And they really got to be locked in every game. I think this is a game where they lock back in. So Bills, good pick. I think the Bucks are a great pick here too. Coming off 2 straight losses at home. It's a divisional opponent, so that's why it's not the best pick, but I'd be very shocked with these guys coming back for the Bucks after coming off 2 straight losses at home with Tom Brady. If they lost to a subpar Falcons team that just lost Cordero Patterson, who's probably their best player. At least he's playing like it. So without him, I think this Falcons offense is going to be even more deficient than it kind of already is, although they definitely outplayed this year. Packers, not at home. They are in London facing the Giants team, though. I think the Packers are a similar story with the Bills. Although they won last week, it didn't really feel like a win. I think they're going to look to stomp on an inferior team, the Giants, this week. And I think, the Vikings and Chiefs, they should win these games, but you're facing divisional opponents. You're coming off wins. It's always a different trap spot when you start looking ahead against these teams that are worse than you. So something to be aware of for sure. But that's it for me. Saints, again, decent value pick, but I think if you haven't picked the Bills yet, I think it's the time to do it, especially given how thin these survivor leagues are running. A lot of upsets each week. Sometimes it seems like there's good picks out there, but there's been a lot of upsets this year, a lot of parity in the NFL. And I think it's good to just take the best pick each week, barring any injuries that it might come up in practice in the future. But Bills this week. Don't look back, and I will see you in week 6 of the Survivor League.